Micah, TJ was talking yesterday about like the role that he sees for himself, and he just seems to have for a young player, kind of a sense of what he needs to do, and kind of stay within the limitations and then expand off that. What do you see from him in sort of his mentality of approaching what he thinks is going to be an opportunity for him today or this season?
Yeah, I think what TJ said and what you're saying, absolutely, to echo that. We talk about it as a staff. TJ, even though he's a little bit older, if you will, but I mean, as a rookie, just knowing who you are and knowing what works in this league and not trying to do anything different. Work on stuff to add to your game, but not falling away from what you are, which is a downhill driver. Put yourself on the rim, get to the free throw line, defend at a high level. But he knows when you see, even in the playoffs, when he had the big scoring games and all that, a lot of it wasn't plays run for TJ Shannon. It was more him just getting out, getting to his spots, go and catch, get himself downhill. And he is one of those guys like, north and south runner in football. You think of him, he's not going side to side, everything downhill, and absolutely. I think the one thing where his game needs to grow a little bit and where I wouldn't say it regress, but just defensively, because there's a lot of switching now and being able to stay in front and using his strength to keep guys in front on the perimeter and that type of thing. But as far as for a rookie to know who they are as a player, he's as good as we've had, I think.
Finch always says you are what you guard. What will TJ guard, do you think, mostly this season?
That's a great question, too. I think more so probably the bigger threes, maybe some fours, as small as everybody is now. The thing with us is because the 4 and 5 position, those minutes have been dominated by Nas, Rudy, and Julius. A lot of times he'll find himself at the 3. And so I think that a lot of times he'll be playing the bigger threes. The one thing that he will be able to do then, like you could do with Jaden, is you can switch 3-4, you can switch 3-5 with TJ strong enough to keep those guys, those bigs in front of him. But I think just being able to switch, use his strength, use his size to stay in front of guys. And I think the other thing you'll see with the maturation of these guys as the league goes on, and so much of the league now is directional and game planning, because guys are going to go the way they feel more comfortable. So just knowing, hey, this guy's a left-hand driver, this guy's a right-hand driver, knowing your opponent's strength just as well as you know yourself.
We talked about ball pressure has to be better, transition has to be better. It's a focus of training camp. How do you make that? Like, how does that go into practice? We think about, they emphasize it. How do you go about emphasizing that to make sure guys are actually doing it? Things that maybe they aren't always naturally doing.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing transition-wise, what you can do is you'll see us playing a lot more odd man, so like more 4-on-3s, more even 3-on-2s, but 5-on-4s, where especially when you're at a disadvantage as you go back into transition, that puts an emphasis of, number one, getting back. I think where you'll see us is, I think the big things in transition and defensively, what we've got to do is we've got to be able to do 3 things. One, when a shot goes up, you either got to get back or you're crashing. We do a lot of stand.
I didn't mean defense transition, defensive ball pressure, and then offensive transition.
Well, I think we talked about that. I think the one thing that you'll see is we were 27th last year in transition opportunities, but we're 3rd in the efficiency. So one of the first things we talked about today was, the one good thing with the talent that we have, 1 through 4, meaning with that starting group, and then even if you add Nas and Dante, all those guys can push, except for probably Rudy. So, but what you would see last year, we would kill our own transitions. Our defense has been very, very good. We get a lot of stops, but we don't get a lot of easy buckets because of it, because I thought what happened a lot last year was Rudy would rebound and he'd be turning and looking at Mike, Ant, and Julius. So the thing we talked about today and the thing we want to emphasize is if Rudy rebounds, everybody run except for Mike. And then if you guys want to push Julius and Ant, then rebound and get it. And I think the other thing you'll find if we play like that, Julius and Ant are not going to lose shots. In my opinion, they'll probably end up getting more because you're going to find Julius rim run against a mismatch, especially with teams playing smaller, and he can seal there at the rim and get himself some easy ones. And you also now, when you see Ant running on a wing with the throw ahead, and Mike, obviously a very unselfish player, will kick ahead, and now you'll have Ant attacking a transition defense rather than all 4 of us sitting here and then marching band style up the floor where we don't get good looks and easy buckets.
How do you make sure Ant does push in transitions? We saw him pull up like 3-on-3s, 2-on-2s last year where he would start slowing it down.
Yeah, I think the one thing too, Chase, that we talked about that is, and it's funny, like today, the first day of training camp, you tell guys to run the corner, you tell them to get downhill. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks from now, everybody's at the break. And then 4 weeks from now, they're all stopping in the high quad. So I think it's just a matter of, and that was Finchie's biggest thing is to all these guys, and I thought he made a great analogy, and I apologize if he said it the other day, but like, if you're a golfer and you're trying to go from a 20 to a 10 handicap, it's much easier than trying to go from a 5 to a 3 or a 4. And that's the thing he kind of hit the guys with today is where on the margins and the little things and the details. And yeah, it's a lot of, everybody says it every training camp, everybody's saying the thing, but for us, it's building those habits, continuing to talk about that every day, not just the first week of camp and then, assuming they know.
What were some other points of emphasis today, Micah?
Well, I think the big things was the transition for sure, and then just the defense and pick and roll, and Jason, like what Finchie said yesterday, and Jason talked about it, just the ball pressure and getting back into the ball. I thought that 2 years ago, that's what, you think about, everybody thinks about that Denver series, and when you would think of Nikhil and Jaden and even Mike and then Ant on Jamal Murray and the troubles that we gave them is just, and then that also not having to rely so much on Rudy, because that puts a lot of pressure on Rudy when you don't have good ball pressure. Now he's playing basically 2 versus 1. So a lot of it was just back to the shell, being on the ball, and then in pick and roll, getting into the ball more and not letting the ball get downhill where we're always playing essentially with the defender behind. So those are the big things today, along with the transition and getting out and playing more and getting easier baskets rather than just having to play against a set defense all the time.
Along those defensive lines, what is one thing the non-Rudy group needs to do defensively this year, if you could kind of magic wand it?
No, I think
they didn't do last year.
I think what happens with that, and it's for Rudy across the board his whole career, like even you saw when he was in Utah, what happens is, in playing against Rudy, as soon as Rudy's off the floor, everybody makes a point of emphasis, just attack the paint and just drive, because Rudy's not there anymore. So I think that's the same thing that was happening with us. And so the big things that we can try to do is provide more help, shrink the paint up behind it a little bit more. That also goes hand in hand with being better on the ball, 1 through 5, not just with those perimeters, but making sure you don't get beat on the first dribble, making guys go more east to west, so that allows the low man to help. But I think you're going to see a much more crowded paint and forcing people to have to play out of kickouts rather than just living at our rim, and then that also gets you into foul trouble and then them living at your free throw line.
Is that what you did?
Couple more guys.
2 years ago? I mean, when Rudy was off, when Carl was on there and Kyle it wasn't a huge gap.
Right.
What was that group doing
Yep.
when Rudy was off the floor that war?
So I think what worked more so with that was with Cat, we played a lot more high wall. And so when he was at the 5, we were basically essentially like a blitz. So it was getting the ball out of the point guard's hands. And now with Nas and with Julius, you're seeing more switching instead of just the high wall. And a lot of that is because, to your point, we had Kyle Anderson being that low man as opposed to being so much smaller behind it. And now I think what you say is if we're going to switch and play to some of those advantages and try to keep people in front of people, making sure we have more protection built in rather than just allowing the straight line drives.
Can the kind of pick and roll coverages you deploy affect like guys' mindset when it comes to ball pressure? Like if you're up on screens as opposed to being in a drop or something like that, does that maybe enhance their mindset to be like, hey, we got to be more aggressive, we have to be more on it, as opposed to being a little more passive in certain coverages?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. I think that for the most part, what you're saying there is, Chris, is if you're playing more drop, then you're not as worried. Like if Rudy's just down the floor, then what guys may have to is you can just kind of just say avoid the screen, meaning you can get under, you can get over if you can, but don't get hit. Whereas if you are up higher, we're saying get into the ball, fight over the screen so we can get back in front of the ball as quickly as possible. And a lot of times, and that's the benefit of having Rudy, but also, you're relying on Rudy too much where he just covers up for a lot of mistakes. And then I think where you see that, going back to what Dane was saying, is when Rudy's off the floor and he's not there to essentially play 2-on-1, which he's really good at. Now Rudy is gone and we're essentially playing 5-on-4 and they're living in our paint, living downhill. But absolutely, the depth of the coverage.
If you're trying to instill an identity of kind of reintegrating that ball pressure and making it what you do you almost have to make the rotations with that in mind?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely, and the thing is, one more, you hear that all the time, whether it be one more stop, one more rotation. But I think the other thing that does with us, Jace, is much like you saw 2 and 3 years ago when Carl was at the 5, when you know that you're up at the level and you're going to be in rotations, it kind of gets you in that mindset of flying around, whereas opposed to when you're trying to play things 2-on-2 and stay home with Rudy in the drop, and then you take Rudy off the floor and they're like, crap, now we have to start flying around a little bit more instead of just living in that mentality of being able to rotate.
Like subbing rotations, though.
Oh, subbing rotations? No, I think the one thing, like, there's only those 96 minutes, you hate to say it, that 4 or 5, so it's difficult for us, in my opinion, because Nas, Julius, and Rudy are so good. Like, you split that up, that's like for them to play 30 minutes a night, which is tough. I guess. And if there's ways that you can find, there's going to be nights when they're in foul trouble, and God forbid injuries happen. But I think the one thing is Nikhil is out, but I still feel really, really good, and I think Finchy does it. We'll be able to find a solid 9 and 10 to